Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. And welcome to today's HDI webinar, Future Forward, Executive Strategy in a New Complex World. Today's webinar is brought to you by Support World Virtual, coming to you on May 19th to a computer near you. You can connect with HDI on Twitter, on Facebook, on LinkedIn, on our community site, HDI Connect, and subscribe to our Spotcast podcast on iTunes or SoundCloud. HDI, smarter service, better business. I'm Roy Atkinson, Group Principal Analyst at HDI and ICMI, and we have just a few housekeeping announcements before we begin. If you're experiencing any technical problems, please refresh your browser. It really works wonders. You can participate in the Q&A session by asking questions at any time during the webcast, and they'll be answered during the Q&A session toward the end of the webcast. You can download the slides from today's presentation by opening the Attachments tab on your BrightTalk screen. And be sure to check out the other links you'll find there as well. There will be audience polls, and you can respond in the Vote tab below the presentation window. Remember that today's webinar will be available on demand shortly after the completion of this live webcast, and you'll receive an email reminder that it's available. The slides will advance automatically for you throughout the event. With us today is Patty Blackstaff, a CEO of Strategic Sense and co-founder of the leadership development group Global Sway. She unlocks potential for executives, leaders, and companies preparing for an ever-increasing focus on digital technology. She's obsessed about connecting humans with technology for amplifying wild collaboration, obliterating silos, and inspiring compelling experiences. When she's not leading people experience for digital transformation or coaching executive leaders in the technology space, she's an industry advisor for the Business Technology Management Analytics program at the Haskayne School of Business at the University of Calgary. A gallery showing artists, she dabbles in spatial computing and augmented reality. You can find Patty's company on Facebook and Twitter at Strategic Sense. And also there's a link to the website in the attachments folder. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Patty. Take it away, Patty.
Thanks so much, Roy, for that kind introduction. I'm happy to be invited to share a bit about how we facilitate company leaders to move through strategic planning in complex situations. And while the course is called Executive Strategy in a New Complex World, we like to look at it more of hacking strategy in unpredictable, chaotic situations. Because when things are unpredictable, we need to move fast and learn fast to make some quick decisions. Chaos creates fear and doubt, and there is a focus on the unknown, and for some that can be paralyzing and even complex. We use strategic transformative planning to better understand the complexity, and we try to provide tangible information to work with through the process. Today I'll walk through three specific foundations we use. A high-level view of how we approach strategy for transformation. We'll chat about the importance of being systematic in learning lessons along the way, and describe how strategy and lessons learned lead to discover what to change. Before I start, I'd like to run through my version of transformation and what instigates a transformative strategy. True transformation, we consider it more of a metamorphosis, changing what the company does, how they do it, the way they offer it, where those things are completely different than they were before. We believe that transformation is not an organizational shuffle or adding a technical tool. Those changes do have the potential to transform a business, but they're transactional changes that through larger organizational efforts become enablers for transformation. They're not considered transformation in and of themselves. For example, a few years back when the service management project we did with a large multinational, nothing changed but a few pieces of technology. They failed to put some project dollars in and evaluate the change processes, the organizational structure, and other pieces needed to support transformation. How they did their business did not change. So I consider this kind of an expensive failure. They went right back to how they'd done things before. The tool just became more of an albatross, but with the added cost of licensing. Had they implemented this enterprise software throughout the organization to manage assets, automate effort, integrate with other ERP pieces, and reskill and upskill, they'd have seen a far better return on their investment and successfully transformed how they did their business. Oops. Playing with the slides here. There's many types of siloed efforts that are disguised as transformation. I won't go into all of them, but some of you are going to recognize a few. And I see questions coming in, and we will address those at the end. But a couple of familiar siloed transformation pieces that we see organizations do are cost to revenue, which usually involves layoffs, which is siloed to a financial shift. Customer experience, when a company tends to focus only on external experience to external customers and fails to actually address the experience within the organization. And business models, where a strategic plan might be stuck in the executive office. These are the ones we're most familiar with when we walk in and try to work with a company and shift that story. We're kind of walking into a new era, and we have been for the last 5 years. Many of my IT and organizational colleagues have had lots of conversations about some pretty big ideas. We've been witnessing what we call the convergence of technologies, which is shifting a business landscape. And lots of us are recognizing it from different areas of the business, but not always is the business recognizing it, that we have big impacts coming that are driven by data science, quantum data analytics, and the democratization of some of our technologies. Now, it's exciting to see the potential, but we've also been asking the question, what's been holding companies back? I personally believe that they've not hit what we call their strategic inflection point. According to Andrew Grove, who is the former CEO of Intel, some of you may have heard him describe a strategic inflection point as a time in the life of a business when its fundamentals are about to change, and this results from an event which changes the way we think or act. Now I'm going to pause for a few seconds for you to read that again. I think you would agree that right now, during a global pandemic, we're witnessing the largest strategic inflection point, at least the largest I've ever seen in my lifetime or career. Past inflection points could include things like a competitive disruption. We've seen that in the hotel, taxi, and automotive industries, which have been forever changed. But nothing is like the strategic inflection point we're experiencing right now. This is all-encompassing for businesses large and small, and change had to occur at lightning speed to accommodate work from home strategies, which is, for some organizations, something that's been pushed for but not accepted in the past. So I appreciate you being here for scenario planning, and I am going to get into that, but I do want to talk a little bit about the strategic inflection point and why that matters to strategic planning. That point in the center indicates a time where something's changed or disrupted the industry or business enough that without making any changes, the business has an increased potential to decline. There's also a period of time when leaders deny it. They deny that change is needed, they drill in harder and throw more money at the areas that are bleeding. I've been there as a leader of an organization and done it myself. We've got to save it. This was our plan. And they try to recover business where it used to work in the manner in which they used to function. This can lead to a business death spiral until the recognition that the past is no longer going to sustain the future. It's painful. One famous organization we might remember as in the past, and it's long past, but it's a really good description of an ignored strategic inflection point, and that was when RIM ignored their value and didn't pay attention to the competitors. Everybody remembers BlackBerry and how it disappeared, and now it is not even on the radar. Recognition, that one point of recognition is when we see dissonance within our organization. That symphony we've been playing with our teams is no longer harmonious. We see pockets of harsh reality. It kind of smacks us in the face. There's this discord among teams, blame, frustration, loss of revenue, larger turnover, and the current playbook begins to feel unsuitable. It's at this point where strategic transformation planning is most needed to bridge the dissonance gap between recognition and the start to strategic action. Love them or hate them, one company under Satya Nadella's leadership is great at recognizing strategic inflection points, and that's Microsoft. They've learned to be strategic in an agile and inclusive manner by using their ongoing strategic planning, which does answer one of those questions I see in the question section. It's ongoing strategic planning with lessons learned and continuous improvement models. We've developed this future-forward approach. It involves a combination of transformative scenario planning with a systematic lessons learned, which leads to the evaluation of what actions to take and what needs to change for accelerating business. This is kind of our approach of speeding up strategic action and gets the organization moving quickly ahead through action. So when we talk about change, change is transactional. There are some transactional pieces that are involved. When we're talking about transformation, that means it's an all-system, full ecosystem shift to doing business slightly differently or really differently. I'd like to pause, Roy, and do a little poll before I move forward, and then we'll jump into our scalable strategic planning piece. If you wouldn't mind voting, if you wouldn't mind voting on the tab on your screen, how often have you personally been included in strategic transformation planning within your current organization?
So just underneath your display window where you see the slides, find the Vote tab, and you'll see the poll in there, and you can respond right in that Vote tab to the poll. How often have you been included in strategic transformation planning in your organization? More than once a year, sometimes, seldom, never. Okay, we'll keep it open for a few more seconds and let you respond to that, and then we'll tabulate the votes. And there's usually a little bit of a lag between the time we stop the voting and the time we see the final results. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and stop the voting now, and let's give it a second to tabulate, see if there's any last-minute differences. And here's what we see. 23% of you say quarterly or monthly. 17% say more than once a year. 29% of you say sometimes. 23% of you say never. 23% say seldom, and 5% say never. So it's almost a normal distribution, Patty. The one that's a little bit lower is more than once a year. There's 17% there.
So that's quite encouraging, actually, for people within organizations. That means they have a bigger voice than in some organizations that we've been involved in. It's a nice representation of people who have been included. I'm going to get us started with transformative scenario planning. The reason I wanted the poll was to better understand how you've had an opportunity, because if you have a small voice or you've been included in some way, this is actually a a really effective transformative scenario planning is an effective strategy approach that can be done quickly, even though it involves the whole ecosystem. Our process was adapted from work performed by Adam Kahane out of Toronto. We met him in 2013 in Portland. He shared his process at a conference, and it made so much sense that we began adopting it and shifting it a little bit to make it our own. What's cool is it's scalable. This is almost like a design thinking process that allows it to be scalable across the organization, and scalable if with small groups as well as very large groups. You see, Adam was the head of Royal Dutch Shell's global scenario team, where he facilitated 22 South African leaders from across the social and political spectrum in scenario planning to make the transformation to democracy from apartheid. The group identified 4 potential pathways a post-apartheid South Africa might take based on well-developed scenarios. The African National Congress was able to pursue a policy of fiscal discipline and avert financial disaster because of this process. So it is proven, and it's proven at a very large scale. The use of scenarios create real-world examples that allow the identification of risk, but also include voices from multiple disciplines, geopolitical areas, and government competencies. Equally so, it can be managed throughout your organization in much the same way. The process we've adapted is broken into 5 steps: initiate, observe and capture, scenarios, ideate and create, and evolve. I'll offer a high-level view of what we do in those 5 steps. Starting with step 1, initiate, you'll want a facilitator who's neutral to your organization with experience in breaking through status quo. There are a lot of reasons for that, but one of the main ones is they're not trapped in an idea of what the business should be doing. You convene a positive transformation team. Now, these are allies who will be willing to open their minds to possibility, and this effort should not be delegated to lower staff. The transformation team needs to have both authority and responsibility. They uncover common intent. Now, that doesn't mean we leave it at the executive level, not in any way, form, or manner, but they do need to set some parameters. This common intent would be agreeing on a daring vision it wants to achieve in the long run. Strategy is about the long game, not a short-term stop. Even though things are complex and the world appears unpredictable, this process can give you learning to help you navigate through the unpredictability. Then you identify a scenario team, and here's where the voices come in from across the organization. The transformation team identifies people throughout the organization that can contribute to building scenarios. These people are members from the whole system and possibly the ecosystem that that organization is involved with, and through all hierarchies. It doesn't mean it's a large group, it simply means that it's representative. You start without any preconceived solutions, so no set idea of what the strategy should look like. You simply don't have data yet to make that kind of decision. And together you develop a set of guiding principles your transformation team can stand by throughout the process. It's a co-working effort, not directive assigning. Step 2 is observe and capture. Many companies build their strategic plans with limited input above the director or below the director level, and they keep it higher than that. We feel this might be a mistake. In this step, we interview the scenario team to better understand the organization across multiple groups, hierarchical levels, competencies. It's where the transformation team makes deep observations on what's really happening within the organization through the eyes of others. It doesn't have to take a long time, but it does need to be thought out with interview questions and who the team will have conversations with. By interacting with other players, listening, observing, you look for things like structural issues, challenges, pain points, roadblocks. All of those can be discovered. But in addition, thoughts about direction and creative ideas begin to emerge. And you do these interviews keeping in mind the list of certainties and uncertainties that help develop the parameters for the scenarios. When when we move to step 3, scenarios, it's where we really consider it a very important stage. It's often missed when strategic planning is done. It's where stories are constructed about what could or might happen. Anyone here who has been involved in design thinking effort will understand the power behind how these stories are constructed. No one person can see the future, but collectively, when you get a group of people together, they can imagine scenarios that are going to broach many options. So we encourage teams to get creative. Use hypothetical narratives, metaphors, images, names for the scenarios, create comparative pictures of the various scenarios, strike new neurological pathways of thinking, and fill in some blanks that we usually have when we ignore the scenario side and simply try to build a strategic plan. Using the certainties and uncertainties, we define scenarios at a deeper level, which are kind of like negotiable and non-negotiable parameters. We construct potential scenarios based on the interviews, observations, and the parameters. Don't discount this work. We've used these techniques over a period of 2 weeks to accomplish more than an organization will take 3 months to do through various meetings and emails. We organize scenarios that have been creatively described into 4 categories for our future forward approach. So once we have some scenarios and some stories, we begin then categorizing them. We put them into what's expected, what's our preferred, what could play out, what's our feared future. We look at those and kind of divide them into those and then start focusing on some of the preferred future. What we don't do is ignore the negative. We must pay attention to negative scenarios. A lot of times we encourage teams to take a hard knock look at the decisive and indecisive scenarios, identifying the ones that might be representative of the common intent and those which are not. If you want to give these meanings, especially if some of your scenarios require difficult decisions, you can name them so they make simplified sense. Kind of picking a lesser of the evils when you have difficult decision making. The future of business over the next year is going to need this kind of understanding because there are some very hard decisions that are going to be made because of the rough economic impact we see before us. Sorry, I'm just waiting for a slide to move. When we tell stories of the future, it achieves different results than when we just build plans, especially when we're doing that with our ecosystem. We discover things that are not just highly relevant, but things that we would have missed. The combination of this whole system approach and the storytelling fills in gaps, and it increases potential. It's a facilitated effort, and it's a very concentrated effort over a period of a couple of weeks. These are the stories of the business's future, its potential and possibility. They're stories that build buy-in and create action. So stories are catalysts for us humans. We want to be able to see potential and possibility when it comes in the form of stories. We get an even more creative action plan in our approach. Step 4 is ideate and create. Now that we've got the stories to lead us, ideating and creating means we need to find a way to adapt what is to what could be. So this involves challenging our status quo, inspecting if we're really being transformative or if we're stuck in risk-averse response mode. It's important to understand the risks and have those scenarios in place, but we must really do a good old-fashioned SWOT analysis, review the approach, and take the pulse so that we know if it's transformative and if it has the potential to get the results we're trying to achieve with our daring vision. With the transformation team, they create their set of options, our clients, and the way they might hit the key points of those preferred scenarios that they have pulled out of the pile. What can be done, what must be done, will get you headed toward the beginning of an action plan. You want to identify ways that you can quickly initiate prototypes or experiments throughout the business to test your actions. Once you've tested your action, step 5 is what we call evolve. So you want to take action quickly in order to be ahead of a disruptive curve. You don't work in silos when you're trying to transform. It's not effective, otherwise you miss the whole beauty of transformative scenario planning. Transformation is most effective when you see the whole ecosystem as contributing to it. So your plans of actions are developed with a whole ecosystem viewpoint. That entire organization and external intersects need to support this new scenario. So what you have to do is figure out ways to make that happen. You break down tasks that the whole system view is, following those same guiding principles that you designed at the beginning. And then you communicate. So the dissemination of information about the new vision, ways to support the whole business, things teams can do to move forward with a fully fleshed out journey map. Convey at the individual level the way people add value to the whole in this new direction. Companies who succeeded at transforming in the past, regardless of disruption, have 3 things in common. They recognize strategic inflection points quickly, they utilize voices throughout the whole ecosystem, and they experiment and learn from those experiments. I'm going to give you some quotes here that I captured a while back, and the reason I captured them was because they really speak to the success of what it takes to be a learning organization. So we've got James Quincy from Coca-Cola says, if we're not making mistakes, we're not trying hard enough. Netflix has an interesting approach. The CEO, Reed Hastings, says, our hit ratio, a number of hits they have, is too high right now. We have to take more risks to try more crazy things. We should have a higher cancel rate overall. And then Jeff Bezos, if you're going to take bold bets, they're going to be experiments. And if they're experiments, you don't know ahead of time if they're going to work. Experiments are by their very nature prone to failure. But a few big successes compensate for dozens and dozens of things that didn't work. My point of this slide is that transformation means that you'll be doing things you've never done before. So to be successful, you need to have an organization that gets comfortable with experimenting. As the last slide indicates, experimentation has a level of failure. So if one must experiment in order to transform, then one has to learn from those experiments. If you think about these inventions like the electric power generation, mass communication, and sound recording, the person that comes top of mind, of course, is Thomas Edison. And if he was trying to invent anything in some of today's corporate settings, he wouldn't have lasted through the first quarter. His quote is, I've not failed, I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work. We have to change our mindset a little bit within our organizations. I'm not saying you should do 10,000 experiments, but what I am saying is that experimentation is actually our biggest learning tool. Rachel Simmons of Smith College program Failing Well, I love this quote. Failure is not a bug of learning, it's the feature. So let that sink in, because failure is actually how we get better. So this growth mindset, this learning mindset needs to occur. But how do we do that? I've got one missing here. No? Okay. Companies tend to reinvent the project wheel. So a lot of companies are a little bit afraid to fail. Some of them don't have a system in place where they actually learn even from the good projects. They just continue down the path of reinventing that wheel, and some will put more dollars toward avoiding risk than risking greatness. And we often ask the question then, why? Why aren't companies good at failure? Well, there's a few reasons that came to mind as I was creating these slides. Leaders are fear damaging their careers, or there's this win-at-all-cost mentality. We've seen that in sales organizations and witnessed huge pockets of pain avoidance in some organizations. And failures can get hidden, so tracking and understanding them becomes impossible. And so that's why we encourage that the second piece of strategic planning really is having a good learning system in place. Now, if you'll bear with me again, please, I'd love for you to go to the Vote tab on your screen. Roy, we're ready for the next poll.
All right, Patty, I'm going to launch that right now. And the question is, do you have a systematic lesson learned process, or process, as Patty would say? Yes, we review existing consistent systematic process. We review but do not have a consistent systematic process, or we do not review lessons learned. And that's the case in some organizations I've been involved with over the years, so maybe that's your situation as well. So head over to the Vote tab just below your slides window there, and to make sure that your vote gets tallied on this poll. Do you have a systematic lessons learned process?
If you're not seeing the actual question, you can hit the Back to List button within the Votes from Audience.
They don't see that.
You can go back to your list.
The audience view is a little different.
Thanks, Roy.
There we go. We have votes coming in there. Just a couple more seconds. And I'll go ahead and stop the voting. We'll give it a couple of seconds to tally the votes. And it looks like it's done. So we have, yes, we review using a consistent systematic process, about 21%. We review but do not have a consistent systematic process, 71%. And then we do not review lessons learned, 7%. So you probably want to talk about that a little bit, Patty.
Absolutely. We believe that a systematic lessons learned process within any organization is one of your most vital tools. And we're going to walk you through a little bit what that looks like. So experimentation's great, but unless we get good at capturing data, we don't evolve. So your strategic plan hits two areas. One is ideate and create, and the other one is evolve. And both of those require us to learn. Those are our learning sections of our strategic planning. So while you're experimenting, you want to capture the lessons the experiment is teaching you. So I'm going to run through the kind of lessons learned system we help companies build. It's a 6-part system. It takes time to build and socialize throughout the organization initially, but it makes all the difference in eliminating duplicate or redundant efforts along the way, reinventing the wheel, and it increases learning and moves the organization forward much faster. So the 6 stages as you see on the slide are define, collect, verify, store, disseminate, and apply. Pretty simple. Maybe one or two of you, like me, have been involved in an organization, let's say in the past, where lessons learned was a past project moratorium of blame and excuse that didn't really involve learning. This system we began doing research and created as a result of past experiences, and the process actually changes that story. So I'll walk through those steps. Define, in the define stage, stage 1, we ensure the start to the lessons learned system is being implemented in parallel to our transformation effort. It's a real-time activity that helps us redefine. And by parallel, I mean it runs at the same time as we go during the ideate, create, and the evolve steps in our strategic transformative planning. This means we watch for passive, reactive responses. We also track, though, the active, interactive, and after action as well. So it's all through the period of experimentation. And you want to capture information in 3 categories. At least these are the 3 we have found work best for us. So that's what's beneficial, what's detrimental, what's good practice, not best practice. We don't use the word best practice because we feel it tends to create a situation of insisting things are done a certain way, and for a company to evolve, we can follow good practice without sticking with a has to be done this way all the time guideline. Stage 2 is collecting the data. Now, as you move through the last two steps of that planning process, you'll ideate and create and evolve. You'll gather information in your collecting system to capture learning based on experimentation and action plans. That system needs to be accessed by the transformation team you've created as well as a scenario planning team. You want to use a collection system that's dynamic, accessible, and available. It can't be trapped on a single person's hard drive with sole purpose and understanding to collect the data from others. It's one where the entire team is involved, and a single person's hard drive is poor practice anyway, and I'm pretty sure no one on this call would ever do something like that. Stage 3, we encourage verifying and analyzing data at specific milestones. So the verification is facilitated with the team for input. You're more likely to capture if it's correct, redundant, consistent, or relevant when you have many minds looking at what you've captured. Patterns will begin to emerge that will be measurable and trackable. Most large organizations have the kind of tools already in place for making this possible, and this is why we encourage leaders to look closely into the ITSM teams for setting this system up. Stage 4 is store. So once you've vetted the data by verifying and analyzing, it's important to make sure you properly store the results. These are your learnings. Many companies stop here. They create a single report, fly it up the executive chain where decisions might be made, but the organization is unaware of why and how, which doesn't initiate any learning across the organizational spectrum. And it becomes a capture and bury game. That's why buy-in gets lost in some transformation efforts. Learning begins by making data accessible, by identifying primary and secondary audiences throughout the organization and using rich metadata and giving access to information that's transparent and openly honest. It needs to be, as it says on the slide, browsable, executable, learning-based, and user-friendly. I packed as much of this information as I could into this so that if you need to walk away and want to build your own, there's at least the shell or the foundation here. But it needs an owner. So think about your current knowledge base and how it's used in the organization if you have one. There's huge potential for it to include more than just desktop response steps, as many of you well know, and probably likely push your organization to evolve that knowledge base. Next is disseminate. That's stage 5. This is where learning becomes rich. How you disseminate is where the learned part of the system comes in. So teaming with an organizational change management and communication specialist, you can be quite creative in how you choose to share learnings. At our company, we share with our clients what we call a communications a la carte menu, which includes about 40 different options for communicating something using a whole pile of mediums through which to communicate. This brings repetition and access to those who can contribute to the learning of the organization. Don't limit yourself to just a few examples that you're familiar with when it comes to communication ideas. We recommend creative ways to help move good practice forward along an organization's plan of action. Learning is vital to future activities, so we encourage companies to utilize almost a branding and marketing effort, much like what they do with external stakeholders. And they do that with their internal stakeholders. If you are wanting to transform an organization, transformation requires communication, communication, communication. But communication is not an email. Stage 6, the last one, is apply. So applying knowledge across a lessons learned repository takes a learning and growth mindset throughout the organization. This must be supported at the top. That's a big frustration for some organizations where people understand this needs to be done but can't get the budgetary value from it. But leaders who've been through at least one transformative scenario planning round begin to see the value. And so if you can begin talking about the value of design thinking and the circular co-creation that happens around those efforts, you can start to gain support for a transformative scenario planning effort with your leadership. For those of you in an executive role, it's sometimes a hard sell. but it's worth it, and you at least have the voice in to be able to have that discussion. Being able to search, retrieve, review, and facilitate change takes initial effort to set up. It has to be extremely user-friendly, but hopefully so is your do-it-yourself portal if you have one. So work with me here. Many companies already hold the infrastructure for making lessons learned a capability that will enable agility throughout the organization. The value behind making this visible, transparent, and a push toward behavior shift can't be understated. Now we get to that last outcome that we talked about. How does one know what needs to change? I'd like you to think about the two processes I just described. I'm going to suggest that you kind of already know the answer. You'll have put into place a couple of systems if you use both in line with each other for strategic transformation that are the foundations to the change question. So many of us know that some companies are kind of trapped in this suspension when they don't have to be. The benefit from the combination of these processes can lead to change that most believed was impossible. And I'm talking about the kind of companies that might be living in a 1950s hierarchical model, a 1970s style of management, a 1980s shareholder value at all costs, kind of that dinosaur era structure that doesn't really feed continuous improvement. But it can be possible to change. As Adam Kahane discovered in his efforts, even deeply seated and seemingly immovable systems can be transformed. Never before, and I really feel this strongly, have we had the catalyst for transforming than we have right now. The actions that are born of these two processes, the transformative scenario planning and your systematic lessons learned, can outline actions you need to take and clearly define the changes that you need to make. We're used to change activators we've seen in the past. Some of them are operationally driven and require us to shift within the organization, and some are company driven, based on typical business drivers. But most of these require some form of typical transactional process to achieve. Some of them we isolate as their own piece instead of looking at the whole ecosystem. But right now, I would say that we are in a crisis accelerator. One, like the COVID-19 crisis, is a global fault line shift for businesses worldwide. Our businesses, large and small, are feeling the loss of control and they're feeling unpredictability. And because of the huge leap to working from home for many, we have new internal expectations for old holdout companies that didn't believe in working from home. We have flexible working relationships with companies that are shaking up what the gig economy looks like. We have new relationships with the word global even, which is emerging for companies of all sizes. We're likely to see whole business models and product lines shift. Emerging job classifications we've been slow to adopt are launching forward in leaps and bounds. How we support all of this will take some deep scenario planning and a committed effort for experimenting and learning as we go. Perhaps for your organization, I don't know, but maybe this is a place you can start to take steps where fear and doubt are paralyzing action. I'd really like to remind you that the stories are about the humans. Transformative scenario planning gets our human brains into creative mode. What that means is that we collectively, when we get together and really work through scenarios that could be possible, what is potential, and using what we have to become what we could be makes a real difference in our organization. Being willing to put a system in place, to learn from our experimentation, and having our organization understand that everything's going to be new a little bit in some way when we come out of this. And learning as we go helps us course correct. It makes us agile and a little bit more resilient. True transformation occurs when we build an action plan through the entire ecosystem. that helps us enable change. So I guess that's my soapbox of the day, because I really believe in it, and I've seen this work and I've seen it become quite valuable for organizations. I'm going to move us forward by saying thank you. And if you need to get a hold of me, this is where we are. Roy, can you lead us through Q&A?
Sure, I absolutely will, Patty. Thanks so much. And I would remind folks that the full slide deck with all of those lovely diagrams and bullet points and everything that Patty talked about, so to help you build your plans, is available in the Attachments tab on your BrightTalk window. You can download the entire deck. So I would advise you to do that, along with the other useful links in there. Okay, questions. Let's start with a fairly basic one. How do I get into strategic discussions if I'm not currently involved, even though I have what I believe to be useful input?
Great question. When you get the playback on this, invite someone in to listen to it. I think it's really important that you start having discussions at your level. So we can't always change at an organizational view, but we do talk about little happy pockets within our organizations. And sometimes we have to start within our happy pocket. Sometimes we say, hey, here's a strategy we can do at the level that I'm at. And you begin saying, let's do a department strategy using this process, test it out, see how it works, see what we can do to make it work for us. Once you've proven that within the system and you've invited others in, they begin to want to know how to do this as well. So that's one way you can start. The other one is talking about strategy and talking about scenarios with your teams, asking your boss to be a part of that conversation and having your boss bring that forward. Those are a couple of strategies that we've seen clients use in the past.
Great, thank you. Can you describe the differences between change and transformation?
Change is I'm layering something on the way I do things. So, or I'm changing a piece of the way I do things. So what we do, how we do it, and the manner in which we do business, when we incorporate the ecosystem with it, we are transforming. But if we aren't, if we're just adding a tool, such as a service management tool, or we're adding a ERP system or something, unless we're using that system as an enabler, unless we're actually using it to change how we work, the way we work, the job functions around that tool, the capabilities the tool is being used for, if we don't extend that past just adding the technology, you're not transforming. You're just adding change. I hope that helps.
Thank you, Patty. Is there an optimal sized group to do the kind of scenario planning you suggest? I know, when we're talking about DevOps, you usually talk about 2 pizza-sized teams. What is there a team that makes it workable and without getting too unwieldy?
Yeah, we usually, when we're facilitating, we say that the combination of the transformation team and the scenario team should not be bigger than 24 people with breakouts. The transformation team itself, ultimate size is between 8 and 12 people.
Is there some, this is just coming from me, is there some experience or math behind that? Is there something about those particular numbers that make it work?
It's the conversation, so it's the interaction. When you look at a team of 24, you're looking at it being more representative, but you never work directly with all 24 until you're bringing together ideas that you've done in a breakout. Like many people have been at conferences where you're at a table for 8. you have a very rich discussion. But if you find yourself in a boardroom with 20 people, you find that there are a lot of people who fail to use their voice. We just find that 8 to 12 people, and 8 is optimum for us, in a room when we're doing any kind of breakout is ideal. 24 means you're being mostly representative across the organization. Any more than 24, you're maybe watering down the possibility of their contribution.
Great, thanks. The most difficult thing I've experienced is speaking up on strategic changes without stepping on toes, especially working in an organization that has a very hierarchical structure. How do you recommend we navigate the conversation in a traditional organization?
That's a tough question. That's a tough question because that's culture-based. So that sounds like one of those organizations I described earlier that are stuck in this 1950s, 1970s, 1980s, different hierarchical and leadership style type shareholder-focused org. Those are holdouts. I'm going to be really honest with you. You can begin with your team. That's that pocket of happiness that I discussed. Begin with your team. You may or may not have the possibility to have the conversations for strategic change outside of that, simply because of the cultural dynamic of the organization. But what that culture is capable of is witnessing good practice that is done by a specific team. And they begin to ask the questions, how did you guys do that? How did you manage that? How come you were so fast at being able to pull that together? The amazing thing is just showing by example. Sometimes that's all you've got to work with, depending on the organization.
Thank you. Here, I love this question. I'm looking forward to your answer on this one, Patty. Is there anything else to consider when we talk about digital transformation instead of just transformation?
Okay. So it depends on your definition of digital transformation. What we are seeing across the board is digital, not necessarily transformation. We're seeing a lot of vendors who will sell the transformational story with their digital solution, and we get trapped in believing that's the answer to our pain. What happens, though, is no one has applied the dollars required to make digital actually turn into transformation. Transformation and digital together means that you've taken that tool and you've actually changed how you do business, because that tool is an enabler to do that. Digital transformation strategies we have seen are encompassing things like how we manage our digital assets, how we manage all of these things. But when they don't include things like process redesign, tossing out what needs to go because it doesn't support the new direction, changing cultural attitudes toward how you work differently, upskilling, reskilling. When those things aren't involved, I don't consider it a transformation. I consider it a digital initiative. Does that answer your question?
One hopes. That's a good answer, Patty. Thank you. What are some ways that organizations can recognize that they're at a strategic inflection point? I mean, the current issues aside, and you mentioned, of course, that we're at a big inflection point globally now because of what's going on, but how can organizations recognize when they're at that inflection point?
So, taking disruptors seriously. You know, when we take a look at disruption often occurs when we're removing friction. So if we have a particular way of working in our industry and we're moving forward full bore and we still have market share and we own market share, we get pretty comfortable. So the little guy that comes in and says, hey, we can do that better. We've removed all this friction and are making it easier for your clients to be able to use us. Take that seriously. So that's step one. Step two is when you begin to feel the pain. You begin to see market share slip, and it doesn't have to slip a lot before disruption begins to take over. So when market share begins to slip, when salespeople begin to get pushed too hard and they are incapable of meeting their goals, you are probably at a strategic inflection point. When collaboration with other organizations, let's take the Intel versus Microsoft collaboration of years ago that kind of blew up, that was a strategic inflection point. That was when Andrew Grove said, whoa, we've got to take a step back here and take a really good look at this. These things are where we begin to feel pain, but not a lot of pain. It isn't until we feel a lot of pain where the dissonance begins to occur that we do see a strategic inflection point heading us down that path of decline. So if we can recognize the pain early, it's very important to take it seriously.
And you did get a response from your question. Does it answer the question? And it's, yes, it does answer. Good point. Digital transformation is an extensive topic by itself.
It certainly is. Are there any other questions about the process itself or any questions that you have for me, Roy?
Patty, you know that I always have questions for you, but I think you've gotten some good ones here. And I appreciate all those questions that have come in. And I would remind you just once again, please take a moment to rate the webinar. All you have to do is click a star rating. If you want to add comments, that's great. Please take a moment to do that. Don't forget to download and take a look at the attachments and links from your attachments tab in your Right Talk window. Get a copy of the slides. There's lots of great information in there. And I will also remind you to join us for Support World Virtual on May 19th. Watch for information. It's going to be coming out quick. And that does not replace Support World Live, taking place later this year in Las Vegas. It is a distinct event, but featuring some of the great speakers from Support World Live as well. And I'll just wrap up by saying this webcast is copyright 2020 by Informa Tech. The presentation materials are owned by or copyrighted by HDI, which is solely responsible for its content, and the individual speakers are solely responsible for their content and their opinions. On behalf of HDI, thanks for your time, especially for you, Patty, and have a great day.
Thanks for attending, everyone. I appreciate it.